Hello and welcome to another episode of Impacting Israel. I'm your host, JJ Sussman, and I'm going to try to bring to you, our Israel-engaged English-speaking audience, the voices that I am privileged to hear, but sometimes and often you around the world don't get the opportunity to see or to hear about. Today's guest, I'm really excited to bring to you, is Reuven Taub. Reuven, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Reuven is a Jerusalemite, a father of three. He is an alumnus of one of Israel's most elite military units, and he worked in the high-tech industry for about 5 years before starting an incredible organization called Alenu. I'm not going to tell you about Alenu, but I'm going to turn to Reuven to share with us a little bit about what Alenu is.
First of all, thanks for doing this, and it's great to reach this audience, to have this peek into the Israeli society. Alenu, as the word in Hebrew means, it's on us. It's a social movement. It's actually probably the fastest growing social movement in Israel today. And the notion is that Israel has now entered its third founding moment. So you have the first founding moment in 47, 48. 30 years later, 1985, Israel reinvents itself. And here we are, another generation later, and we need a new idea. We need a new paradigm. And the way to get there is not by sitting around and waiting for something to happen, but it's actually by saying it's on us to create that change, to build that new idea. And today we have thousands of Israelis joining, primarily young people, but not only, pushing this notion forward.
So before we get to that, I'm going to, even on what you said, you mentioned 85, 86 was the big idea moment, and not 77 when Begin took over. Why the difference there?
So actually the second founding moment started very similar to today. It usually starts with a crisis, unfortunately. So we had the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the biggest tragedy until October 7th of modern Israel. And then we had an elections very soon after where nothing happened. So 1974, there was an election, and Golda Meir, the sitting prime minister, won in a landslide. You can imagine sort of the relationship, the correlation to today. And 3 years later, we thought something very, very big changed. Finally, there was a political shift, and we had Begin rise to power, but nothing meaningful changed. And we continue to deteriorate. People in Israel, Israeli history call it the lost decade, where you reach 1985, Israel was in a terrible situation. So the economy was totally broke. We were 4 weeks away from bankruptcy. Inflation was at 400%. Just so you understand, GDP, so 75% of GDP was government-owned. And then there was a unity government, and they're back against the wall. They had to make a decision. Do we, what we call today, kick the can down the road, try and raise another $3-4 billion from, the global JP Morgans and so on? Or do we actually try and reinvent Israel, transform Israel? And that's when they went back to the foundations of what reinventing a nation looks like. It's always answering three fundamental questions. What is your geopolitical posture? What is your socioeconomic contract? And what is the national narrative? And we can discuss maybe further on what those were, but they really didn't kick the can down the road. They paid very heavy political prices, and they totally reinvented Israel's geopolitical posture, the economy, the invention of the new Israeli shekel, the birth of what we know today as the new Israeli shekel, creating a capitalist economy and so on and so forth. And that really changed only in 1985. And in the past 40 years since then, Israel's GDP has grown 10x. And now today Israel is a $600 billion economy. It's mind-blowing to think what we could have done and what we did in those 40 years.
But if I look back, so what you're saying is from the crisis event of 1973 until that unity government was formed in 1985, that took 12 years. Is that what we have in store for us now?
So I have dedicated my life to make sure and to work every day that we don't go into another lost decade. What a crisis does, it's basically the tip of an iceberg. Because up until the Yom Kippur War, up until October 7th, we are walking around, our lives, the world, and, we see things, we see reality. And like every human being, this is Dani Kahneman, the confirmation bias, we explain to ourselves why what we're seeing actually suits our pre-existing mental model. But when an event happens, like the Yom Kippur War, like October 7th, it's actually an opportunity to say, well, this is actually the tip of the iceberg, but there's something much deeper, a foundational element that needs reinventing. And what Alenu does is to say, we need to start with an idea. We need a new idea of what Israel's geopolitical posture is, what the socioeconomic contract needs to be, and what the new narrative, the national ethos needs to be moving forward. I hope that on one hand, the magnitude of the tragedy and the number of people who are impacted by it. And on the other hand, I'm a big optimist. The total optimism and the energy that exists today in Israeli society, we can successfully transform Israel into its next founding moment. So Israel and what we call the founding grandchildren. The notion is that we had founding fathers and mothers. We had founding children in 1985. And now it's the turn of the founding grandchildren, Israel's third founding moment, to build Israel, 3.0.
And hence the name Alenu, the founding grandchildren, if I recall correctly. Does this election, if it goes in a way that you don't want it to go, does that mean all the work has gone for naught, or is it just an election?
For me, the point we want to look at is, it may seem far away from now, but when Israel is 100 years old, so that's not in a long time, that's 22 years from now, I will be 53 years old. And we will be looking back at this exact moment in time, this window of opportunity. And I'm calling it a window of opportunity after October 7th, after 3 years of a war on 7 fronts, after everything that has happened. And we will ask ourselves a pretty simple question. Were we willing to pay the big prices necessary in order to transform Israel? Now, these prices is what I'm working for, Alenu's goal is to create the political will to transform Israel. So this is across the geopolitical spectrum. This is across the socioeconomics. In the end of the day, it's 5 public goods. There's personal safety, education, transportation, infrastructure, and healthcare. In each one of the first 4, not in healthcare, and I'll say a word about healthcare because that's the industry that I come from. In each one of the first 4, there is, if we're speaking to an American audience, there's a whale. The whale is the big fish, the big issue, that if you are not willing to tackle that issue in this election or the next election, whenever, in the next, let's say, the lost decade, whoever's not willing to pay the big political prices to go and attack these issues, then it's a waste of time. And the role of Alenu within the ecosystem of social movements and think tanks and political parties is to create that political will to tackle those big issues. So we can discuss some of them at length, but when I go back to this 100 years, what I care about is, are we dealing with the core issues, those big whales? Now,
not just dealing with them, tackling them.
Are we willing to?
Solving them.
Are we willing?
Exactly.
Are we willing to tackle them head on? Head on means.
I think before we even continue, let's go into the healthcare, because I've seen you write about this in the past, and you talk about Chaim Ramon's paying the political price to, I guess, solve the healthcare crisis that we had a few decades ago into what we know today as Israel's healthcare system. And you try to apply that to education, I think I read, is where you try to apply it. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece recently which says Israel's education system in 2026 is similar to Israel's healthcare system in 1992. So very brief history on what happened in 1992. Prior to that, the 2 decades leading up to the 90s, Israel's healthcare system was totally broke. It was centralized, it was inefficient, and unfortunately, it was very sectorial. So if you were part of one political party, you got healthcare type A, and if you were part of a different political party, you got different healthcare. And in 1989, there was sort of a national inquiry, a national committee led by Shoshana Netanyahu, Bibi's aunt, who was a justice. And they said, okay, what needs to happen? And they built the prescription. So what needs to happen, the policy was very, very clear. What was missing was the political will to actually go and execute. Fast forward a few years, and 1992, along comes somebody called Chaim Ramon. He was in Rabin's party, in the leading party, and he says already in his campaign, in his election campaign, he tells the public, give me your trust, give me your vote, and I will give you the bitter pill. I'm not going to solve it, it won't be amazing, and I'll solve all your problems. I am going to make a very tough decision to take apart and put back together the Israeli healthcare system. And he paid huge prices. The famous, it's funny, it's called the whale speech. So he goes to his own party's political conference and he delivers the speech saying, we can't continue taking people's money and using it for political reasons, not giving them healthcare. He was forced to resign as the healthcare minister. And then he became head of the labor unions, and he was still a member of Knesset, and he passed what we know today as the National Health Law, which is what we know as the 4 HMOs, the competing HMOs. There's a decentralized system, and today Israel's healthcare system is in the top 3 in the world. I've worked in Israel, in the UK, in the US. It's quite unbelievable. Now, why is it so good? And this going to healthcare. For me,
To healthcare, to education now.
So why is the healthcare so good? And then thinking about education, what it should look like.
I'm waiting for that one because I have a lot of kids. I'm fairly invested in the educational system in this country.
The most superior metric for a public system is that people wake up in the morning and don't think about it. It's obvious to them. The Israeli healthcare system is that good that virtually no Israeli is thinking about it, where they want to live, where they want to work, which schools they send them, nothing, because it's that good. It's a public system. 70% of Israelis don't pay for it. Price performance is 8.5% of GDP and so on. Looking at Israel's education system, it reminds us of what was the situation in 92 before this transition. It's the most centralized system in the OECD. It's extremely sectorial, and it's totally inefficient. 100 billion shekels a year. 1 in every 7 shekel of the Israeli budget, national budget, goes to education. Now, that is a mind-blowing number, especially when you look at the results. We are always in the bottom third of the OECD metrics, whether it's in reading, whether it's in maths and science, and so on and so forth. So what, have we not done anything about it in the past 20 years? We've tried almost everything. We've raised teachers' salaries, we've made classes smaller, we've tried more reforms of math and science under the sun. The main thing, the hot potato that nobody wants to deal with, is decentralizing the system. Okay, there's a famous graph the OECD puts out once every few years saying how many decisions are made by central government, and Israel is always at the bottom of that graph.
In education.
In education, and unfortunately in other areas as well. Again, public transportation and so on.
Yeah, because there's a discussion about that now.
100%. We can talk about transportation in a moment. And there are two main issues that, funnily enough, there is consensus from all the way on the right until the left. People know Kohelet on one side, and
the right-wing think tank,
and Berel Katzanelson, a left-wing think tank. Everybody agrees you've got to decentralize the system. And the two main areas are turning the ministry from what is called an operator, who operates the education system, into a regulator. Right. So don't operate anymore, just regulate really, really well. And the other element is how you hire and fire teachers. My mum, she's in the system for 30 years. She's been a teacher.
My wife too.
And for the past 7 years, she's been a headmaster of a school, a principal of a school. And these are incredible people who put their lives and souls into their kids, but their hands are tied behind their back. They can't hire a teacher they really want. They can't fire a teacher who's just no good. And I was on an interview not long ago on Israeli television, and they asked me, well, what's going to happen? There's going to be teachers who are losing their jobs, and, it's a bad thing. What are you going to do? And I said, listen, stop, hold on a second. Would you be okay with the pilot flying your airplane being mediocre? Probably not. Would you be okay with the surgeon performing your surgery being mediocre? So how on earth are we okay with the teachers teaching our kids every single day being mediocre? We can't afford it, and it's not Jewish. What's the pride of being Jewish for the past 2,000 years? It's education. So it's mind-blowing to me that we can't get this through. So what is the core element? What is the whale in education? It's decentralizing the system. And how do you do that? Unfortunately, in Israel, there is one big, elephant in the room. That is a strike. Yeah. Okay, we're getting to September 1st.
I'm ready for it. It's August. Every Israeli is waiting for August 31st to hear that there's going to be a strike the next day, and the schools won't open.
The schools don't open. Why? Because they want to take away just one tiny example. The strike this time may be about the one day during this last Iran war, the one day that teachers may need to forfeit in terms of their vacation day. Now, my argument is not to the teachers. The teachers are doing incredible
it's a structural argument.
The structural system, the teachers' union and the ministry. You need to, imagine in the negotiations, you need to take that element of we will strike off the table. How do you do that? You prepare for a strike. And this is a year and a half ago, I floated the notion. I was laughed at back then, and today this has become a mainstream idea. This is how Alenu brings things into public consensus. The next government and the next education minister needs to be willing to say, I am going to be the minister of the strike. It could be that the 1st of September, there won't be any schools. And I'm okay with that because I am going to fight this fight. This is the bitter pill. I am going to take apart the system to scratch and put it back together anew. And when we put it back, it will be the best education system in the world because we will solve hiring and firing teachers, and we will make the Ministry of Education a regulator rather than operator. But that is the political will that we need to create.
I recently read that you wrote quote, moderates should demand radical change. The term a radical moderate is something which is fresh and unique and different. Can you talk about what that means?
Yeah, so it actually came to me when I was speaking with one of the most moderate members of Knesset. And I'm trying to explain to him, because he is a centrist by heart, by nature, really top guy.
Can we share who it was?
This is Matan Kahana.
Okay.
I really appreciate we served in the same unit, really top guy. And he said to me, this radical extremism. And I'm like, wait. Radical and extreme are two totally different things. What is an extremist? An extremist is somebody who is on the fringe. And his tomorrow, the extremist's tomorrow, is one that by definition, he wants to change everything, the status quo, but by definition, some part of society is not in that tomorrow, in that future, that we envision. A radical wants to change everything, change the status quo, but everybody has a part in that tomorrow. And when we look at what's happening, it's not an Israeli phenomenon. It's happening in the world at the moment. When you're looking at the UK, you're looking at what's happening in New York with Mamdani, you're looking at Germany, and so on. When the people in so-called the center, for so long, aren't willing to challenge the status quo, aren't willing to do the radical changes that are necessary because reality has shifted. Along comes an extremist, someone on the extreme. It's the AfD in Germany, it's the Mamdani in New York, who says, usually it's in a very populist way, and he'll say, I'm going to solve all your problems. I'm going to serve, and I'm going to do the extreme things that...
Affordability.
That the center, what's happening in Germany for me is an incredible example. Along comes Merz, the new chancellor. And he says, I don't blame the 25% of the German population that voted in AfD. AfD is the extreme right-wing party. He says, because for 16 years, we, the CDU, the centrist party, we didn't tackle the real core problems that related to everyday life. So along comes a populist extremist, and they'll say these people aren't part of the tomorrow, and they offer something else, and people say we've tried, and here's the difference. You can be a moderate and be a radical. You can say, the status quo does not work.
Who might be an example in recent history of a radical moderate?
So I think there's a few examples. When you look at Israeli history and you look at global history, you look at people who came and say, listen, the status quo is broken. It doesn't work. You had the era of the Deng in China, Reagan in the US, Thatcher in the UK. You can argue a little bit about their politics, but these are people who said, we need a new idea. We need a new vision. You had Ben Gurion in 47, 48, who actually managed to look at his own idea that he invented in 1922. And he said, the geopolitical posture that I built, which is work with the British Empire, we need to radically change the idea. He writes, in Hebrew it's called Milchemet Ha'umot, the War of Nations. I need Moscow and Washington to both vote yes for Israel in the next era. And he changes dramatically the way Israel sees the world. He changes the socioeconomic fabric. It's no longer this idea of socialism that he loved to talk about. And he says, Israel is an MVP. Whatever works, I'll take money from the Germans. And he also builds a new ethos. It's no longer the kibbutz, the ivri. It's actually a new ethos of we're actually going to have a proud Jewish sovereignty. So people from Baghdad and people from Morocco can come here and can wear their kippah on the way to shul, which is something they couldn't do for so long. So he really shifts a radical new idea, but he does it not by eliminating people from the story, but actually saying, I want to build a new story.
Bringing people in. And I guess you would say the unity government in 85, 86, the Shamir Peres government would be
they were forced.
Radical moderates.
Yeah,
is the only way to do this now also to create a unity government in this next...
So my hope is that you have a unity government, but for me, the question is, what's the idea rather than what's the political facilitating enablement?
But you need the political facilitation 100%. And enablement. Is Alenu involved in also the political facilitation of it?
So Alenu's role, definitely in this next elections, is to create, let's talk about it in military terms, is to create the aerial support for any party that's going to hunt the whales. If you are willing to be the minister of the strike, if you are willing in transportation to tackle the two key areas in transportation, we could discuss that. Personal safety in Israel we can argue if it's at an all-time low, but the feeling is that it's at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. If you are willing to solve the core issues, not the populist things, which says, let's just take the guns from the Arabs, because we're going to hear that in the campaigns coming. If you are willing to solve these issues from the core, Alenu, with the media, the research, the thousands of activists that we now have. And I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, we led a conference in the Knesset with bipartisan support for both sides of the aisle.
What does bipartisan mean? I almost
exactly. we had participants from the coalition and the opposition. This was specifically in the education space. And the conference we led was called Pinui Binui, so taking apart and putting back together for the education system.
You know, it reminds me, I recently had a meeting with a friend, and she introduced me to the term and to the movement of kintsugi, which I wasn't familiar with beforehand, where basically you break things apart and then not only put them back together, but you highlight at the cracks. That becomes the beauty of what you're putting back together. Because, you know, we have in Gesher saying that we say, להפוך את השסעים בחברה הישראלית לגוונים, to change the ruptures in Israeli society to shades, I guess, which adds beauty to the mosaic.
Yeah, I think that goes also back to the window of opportunity, because I remember myself during the year before the war, so during the judicial
Reform.
the judicial reform, and personally, on one side is the religious Zionist. I went to Yeshivat Hesder and so on, people voting for the government, and on the other hand, I served in the unit leading the demonstrations against this, and in high
Not the actual unit, alumni of
the alumni, yeah, definitely. So the alumni of the unit are the ones leading the movements against the reform and high tech and so on. It's sort of the two worlds that I'm most part of are colliding. And it was at this time I was part of these discussions. What can we do? And I was a pretty niche voice inside the niche voice of like what's going on, which said, we can't, the achdut voice. Let's just kick this can down the road, hope that it goes away. We can't win either, because we're at the point where we are touching the raw nerves of Israeli society. And if we don't leverage these shasa'im, like you mentioned, into an opportunity and say, okay, how is the status quo changing? Because we see it needs an update. So the judicial reform is another, like October 7th, it's the tip of an iceberg that says our idea, our foundations need an update. It's another symptom which explains something much, much deeper. And if we're not willing to transition, if we're going to kick this can, if the next elections, and it may be like another 1974 election, and it takes another 3 years, exactly like it happened after the Yom Kippur War, it may take another 3 years for the new movements to grow, Alenu and others, to say, okay, this is the new idea, this is how we transform Israel in its third founding moment, and then the Israeli society will follow.
We said earlier that Alenu is our founding grandchildren. This election has, I think the number is 640,000 first-time voters, which is a crazy number in Israel because, our previous round, we had elections every 6 months or year and a half or whatever it was, and there was never a full cycle of 4+ years to have so many first-time new voters. They're going to be a significant voice in this upcoming election. How does an organization like Alenu get to galvanize that vote, which will translate into a number of mandatim, or seats in the Knesset? I don't even know how to translate mandatim, mandates.
So it's an amazing question, and I think that point that you've pointed out is one of the reasons that a lot of the existing political parties come to us, because I don't want to say we've cracked it, but it's evident that there's something around Alenu and the ideas that we speak about and the way we, spread the message that works within this younger generation. There's not a week or sometimes a day that goes past without me getting a picture from within Lebanon or within Syria, or someone saying, I'm listening to this content, this is amazing, I've just spoken to my friends about Alenu. So something is growing there, and I'll share a word about the data in a moment, but it's an amazing, because political parties are trying to figure this out. How do you crack this new electoral cohort, and where is their mind? I'll say a few things extremely optimistic about this cohort.
All right, a little optimism.
I think
just by the way, we're recording this a few days before the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. Hence, by the way, the white beard. Usually, I'm not on video; I'm on audio, but I don't usually have this beard. So we're in a time of.
I think you could ask the listeners should vote if maybe you should keep the beard. I don't know. The viewers should vote.
So we're in this time of of connecting to the destruction and to the internal struggles of the Jewish people. So we're very excited to hear a little bit about the optimism.
So I hope it's apparent that I'm extremely optimistic about Israel. And one of the notions we hear when we do political research, we do polling about Alenu's ideas, and we do polling with political parties and movements and so on. And this idea keeps coming back of sober optimism. So Alenu is the sober optimism movement. It's for sober optimists. It's people who are optimists, not because we some la la land, everything's amazing. We're extremely sober about our strength. I would argue that since the days of King Solomon, there hasn't been a sovereign Jewish leader sitting in Jerusalem, not too far from here, with the financial, economic, military, and social might that we have today. You're looking at a $600 billion economy, $250 billion in Israel's net cash reserves. You know, the startup scene last year, 2025, Israelis living among us, they exercised options in tech of 50 billion shekel. So you think how much money went into the system. You're looking at the startups, Wiz and so on, academia. You're thinking about Israel's, obviously, its military, which in my mind, in a lot of elements, is second to none. Think about the Israeli society, this idea of agency, the number of social movements, the people willing to demonstrate on the streets for every cause. Like, we are in such an incredible moment in time that everything, that's so vibrant. And yes, there's arguments. That's great. So on one hand, I'm very, very optimistic. On the other hand, I'm totally sober to the challenges ahead.
Sober being the opposite of drunk, because those in power might be
I think sober is
drunk with all the power that
I think
have.
sober is you understand there's nuances. You want to learn more. There's data. You want to understand the real causes of things rather than, what's at the surface. Sober in the element that I'm not scared because I'm so, okay, I understand. I'll take things in. And I'm optimistic. And this notion hits a nerve with 18 to 35-year-olds. These are people who I can now say with millions of data points, they do not buy a short form in the sense of, just dumb it down, give them 7-second TikToks, just give them a catchphrase, and I'll give you an example. We operate a number of digital platforms, Alenu, that's part of how we started creating this media idea to bring the ideas we talk about into the national discourse. We operate the most listened to independent podcast in Israel today. We have some of the
What's
most...
that called?
So in Hebrew, it's called Shulchan Arba, Table 4. The man who started it is somebody called Gili Biman. And Yonatan Adiri, my co-founder, is his co-host. Okay. And they talk about Alenu-related ideas, geopolitics, not Alenu. So it's all things, but a lot of people who join Alenu come through that funnel. We have other podcasts, one which I do, which has actually been growing very, very quickly, called Medabrim Ra'ayonot, Speaking Ideas. And it's where we bring on the leading potential candidates for Israel's next government, not to speak about who will you sit with, what about this law, but actually what are the ideas at the bottom of your iceberg, what's the big new paradigm?
I'm excited to hear that there are ideas at the bottom of the iceberg, because we, the public, don't...
And if they're not willing to, it's also a confrontation, because if they're not willing to speak ideas, we're here to show them and say, listen, you think, again, we could talk about this on a side note, but the idea is to bring this into the national discourse. And what you see in the data is that young people, and I said 18 to 35-year-olds, listen for an hour and a half content. They want to know. They ask questions, they reach out. And I'll give you just one practical example. A few weeks ago, we said, okay, now's the time to start building out from digital to boots on ground. And we said, let's do a test. Let's open up to our activists. We have people who have signed up because they've done the digital funnel. But I want to see in the real world, are people willing to show up? And we put on Instagram like a story for 24 hours, and we said, we're doing an event. We're going to talk about the next phase 2 of Alenu. Sign up. We wake up the next morning, and I see there are 600 and almost 50 people signed up physically to come. I'm like, okay, wait, stop, close the sign up. We don't have a hall for 650 people. We change the hall. 600 people show up. These are, and that's nobody I asked, so I don't know who they are until they come. They've signed up, their name. You see the entire spectrum of Israeli society, not because I'm doing some DEI, I need the Ethiopian and the Haredi, all of the above, because these are founding grandchildren. These are people who have agency. These are people who are willing to pay a price. It says, we will pay a price because that's the only way to transform Israel. And these are the people, myself included here, we've paid incredible prices over the past 3 years. You'd go to sort of, my younger brother is finishing his army service this week. He's been 4 years in Yahalom. Yahalom is Israel's...
elite unit for engineering.
And in all the tunnels. And the price he's paid and his friends have paid, and we've all in reserves been... I've spent hundreds of days in reserves, you name it. And these are people who say, we are in Israel's third founding moment. We are willing to pay a price to transform Israel. We get it. We get our mission. But we need to meet the political capacity and the political entity which is willing to meet this demand of ours, and that's what Alenu is.
What drove you, Reuven, to co-found Alenu? What was the moment, or what happened? Was it October 7th? Was it before? Was it after? You mentioned the judicial reform.
So personally, I grew up in a home of public servants. My parents made Aliyah from London. My dad was in the foreign ministry for many, many years, and my mum's been in the education system. So for me, I always sort of knew I'm going to be in the public space. After I left, I spent an extended period of time in the military. And after I left, I went into the social scene. I co-founded an organization in informal education space, leadership programs, and so on, and then transitioned pretty sharp shift into tech. So for me, the public space was always, the vector of what I wanted to do, the social public space.
So your time in the tech space was the bug, not the feature.
Even the tech space is a medical device company, and the goal of our company was to prevent dialysis. So we're the first company to receive an FDA approval to perform an at-home kidney test using your smartphone. Mm-hmm. So even that for me is a social element. How do you scale? I got there because I was thinking, how do you scale a social problem? And it's usually through tech, through high tech. And I think things you can do today, the social elements you can solve today through high tech is quite incredible. And October 7th obviously was a very tough and meaningful day. I was called up at 10 to 8. I was actually in Modi'in at my in-laws. It's a funny story because we had tickets, my wife and I, to go and see Bruno Mars, who was performing in Tel Aviv that night.
Yeah.
So we were supposed to go there, leave the kids at my in-laws, and by 10, I was called up, as I said, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was already deployed in the field. I saw everything with my own eyes. The first battle at Tzomet Ma'on, which is about half a mile away from Nir Oz. So we were supposed to get to Nir Oz, but we were ambushed by 12 Nukhba terrorists in that first battle. My commander died in my arms on that day. And then we were in Re'im, and we went at the entrance to Be'eri and the Nova while everything is still on fire. And you see everything raw and naked. For me that day, if there's one key takeaway, as someone who grew up to Olim, for me the Jewish sovereign state was an obvious thing. It's obvious. I grew up, I took it for granted, and that was the first day that I didn't. And I could really see what the lack of Jewish sovereignty looks like with my own eyes. And that's when you decide it's on us. And I, after the first 6 months of Miluim, of reserve duties, when I leave and I see there is no responsible adult. There's an adult, not such a responsible one. And it's on us. It really is on us. That feeling for me is like there's no waiting around. Nobody is coming to solve these problems for us. We have to rise to the occasion and Alenu, and it's on us to solve it.
Do your friends think you're crazy?
They did at the beginning. No, they did at the beginning. They were very supportive, and they knew this was something that drove me. I was driving them mad about it in reserves. So speaking about it, thinking about it, and as they see this growing, they understand, and I think this is something that I was lucky to understand earlier on, that Israel is incredible in the sense that you can really make a dent. Like you don't have to be, it's not a huge country in the sense it's 10 million people. I once heard someone, Israel's the perfect size, that you have a national story, you're not a single atom. You're big enough to be part of something, but small enough that you can actually make a difference. And as you see Alenu grow, and they're very supportive in terms, and very critical.
It reminds me of a joke. There was an event with the Indian ambassador to Israel, and he gets up and he says, "You know what I love about Israel? Is that between Israel and India, we represent 20% of the world population." Yeah.
So I think people relate to what they see you, that drives you, what gives you energy. I'm very lucky in the sense that this gives me energy. So what I feel like I need to be doing and what I enjoy doing overlap, and I'm very lucky in that sense. And on the other hand, I feel like my parents made Aliyah, and that was a huge, and I really admire.
You were born.
I was born here in Jerusalem, and I hugely admire my in-laws made Aliyah, my wife made Aliyah, and I hugely admire anyone who is able to do that, especially from a very affluent country and so on. And you think about what is your role, what is our role in this chain of generations and in our collective story? And you feel like, yes, I have the privilege to act, but I also have the obligation to.
So now I'm going to segue into the three questions I like to ask all my guests. What is it that keeps you going? What is your fuel for the energy that you clearly have, for your sober optimism and the energy to keep Alenu and bring it to where it is today and hopefully even grow even further?
So first of all, it's that overlap. I feel like I'm lucky to do what I feel I should be doing and what I enjoy doing. And that definitely gives me the energy because the day-to-day is not easy. It's a roller coaster. So I was in tech and that was a roller coaster. And here is probably even crazier. You're dealing with politics. You're dealing with people's identity. So you need a lot of energy to deal with that. I think the fact that, I've done a lot of town halls around the country, sort of home salons, over 60 in the past year, around all of Israel. And when people give you the feedback that, I'll give you one story. I finished a town hall, a really small one. As I entered, I'm like, oh my goodness, I came all the way for these few people.
Was it worth driving to a Fula for 8
exactly.
people?
And anyway, I finished the town hall. I'm like, how am I getting home? How am I getting home? It's 12 o'clock at night. I didn't come with a car. I came with a ride. And I asked, is anyone going towards Jerusalem? Oh, whatever, I'll figure it out. And one guy says, I am. I'm like, really? At 12 o'clock at night? He's like, yes, I'm going to Jerusalem. So I said, are you sure? And he tells me, yes, come with me. So we start walking towards his car. And then I stop him and I say, listen, something is weird. Why on earth, this is a town hall, you came because you're close friends. Why on earth are you going to Jerusalem? He says, get in the car. I'm like, okay, I'm armed. I'm always armed. I'm like, fine, let's see where this goes. And we start driving, and he says, I'm not from Jerusalem. I said, I know. I can do guess. And he says, I am from Niroz. Nahal Oz. And he says, this is the first time since October 7th, this evening, that I could breathe.
Wow.
He told me the story the whole way to Jerusalem of how on October 7th, he held the door handle of his mamad with his family inside, protecting his family, while Hamas terrorists were trying to push it down so that they could enter and murder them all. He said for hours he was holding this door handle. Since then, he can't do it. He can't work. He can't do anything. He says, this is the first time that I can breathe. And for me, and he says, I wanted to take you to Jerusalem to tell you that. He took me the whole way to Jerusalem, took me home.
You just told me the story in 30 seconds. It's a long drive.
And then he came out the car, he stopped outside my house. He came around the car. He said, can I just give you a hug? And obviously,
Wow.
And he said, thank you. And he drove back home. And for me, if you can do that for somebody, what else can you ask for?
That's a lot of fuel. Is there any, I'd like to ask my guests, is there any piece of bad advice that they once received that you can share with us?
Bad advice.
And this is the first time I'm doing this on video, so sometimes I can edit the pause. But
so let me, okay, so here's one which also relates to a lot of what we're doing. Actually, we spoke briefly about it, also to the younger generation. When we started off, Jonathan and I, and we presented this theory. We didn't speak much about the theory in terms of what Israel's new paradigm is, the geopolitical one and the social. And so
I wanted to drive people to your website to learn more about the organization.
And we had lots of people telling us before we presented it, dumb it down, make it simple. You need a slogan. You need it. And I wasn't willing to listen. I think it was bad advice. And at some parts at the beginning, I'm like, okay, let's try it. And in conversations and pitches, we tried it. And I saw like, but what differentiates you if you're just on the surface? And when we did our first deep political research, we said, we're not dumbing it down. We want to see what people get. And the feedback was incredible. Incredible. You had the 23-year-old guy from Be'er Sheva, Haredi guy from Be'er Sheva, who's like, I want to give you guys, first time we presented, 18 shekel a month. Chai shekel a month, I'm donating to your NGO because this is something that I believe in. And that for me was, great vindication of the fact that you don't need to, for the younger generation, for the
TikTok generation, you don't need to dumb it down.
I'm a big believer in the median Israeli gets it, and gets it big time because of this incredible Israeli sort of agency mentality.
Wow. And finally, who is your Jewish hero and why? This is good so people can see I'm not preparing you beforehand and asking you the questions beforehand. I can talk a little bit longer to stall. To give you there we go.
So also this I mentioned slightly earlier. I think any person who makes Aliyah, for me, is a hero. I can always, when you see these, you hear these stories of incredible people, you always say, what would I have done in their place? And the people who make Aliyah, looking at my parents, looking at my in-laws, the ability to uproot your life and move to a place which is incredibly difficult, especially as an Oleh. For me, that's a modern-day Jewish hero. People who make Aliyah are modern-day Jewish heroes. There's a few examples, I think, from recent history, and again, we're living amongst heroes. People I was with during the war. Say one short story. We share a family member who's a modern day hero, in a hostage rescue operation that unfortunately failed. The commander of the team, he's an everyday Israeli now, walking around, doing a startup and so on, but he was like something from another planet, because one of his soldiers got injured to the fact that they thought he was dead. Lots of soldiers got injured, but one of them, who was furthest into the house that was booby-trapped, and lots of more terrorists than the intelligence said, and he said, I'm not leaving anyone behind. And he ran in there, literally throwing grenades, like you would imagine on some action movie, dragging his soldier out and saving his life. And I'm sure this is one story of endless where we have these modern-day Jewish heroes. So we don't need to look back, actually. We can look around and they're living amongst us.
Wow. On that note, we could spend hours talking here, Reuven. We still didn't touch on the transportation issue or the personal safety issue. But again, I invite our listeners to really go and look up Alenu. I think it's ALENU.org.
Exactly. And there'll be an English website soon. Right now it's in Hebrew.
Right now it's only in Hebrew, but to definitely learn more about it. And I'm sure you're going to be hearing a lot more about it. But I want to thank you for taking the time today and joining us on Impacting Israel. And for those of you who have any ideas of future guests or can share this specific episode or any of our episodes on whatever platform you may receive your podcasts on, that's always helpful and recommended. And again, if you have any feedback, please reach out to me at jj@gesher.co.il. Thank you, Reuven. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great day and make it matter.